focus with Ijaz here, though. This evening we begin with a discussion of U.S. Pakistan relations. The central plank in this relationship over 2 decades has been Afghanistan. Everything else, whether sticks or carrots, was meant to either punish or incentivize Pakistan to fall in line with the U.S. objectives and interests in this region. Now that the U.S. is in the process of withdrawing from Afghanistan, it is about Pakistan's facilitation of an orderly withdrawal. There's also the bit about helping with the intra-Afghan dialogue, but that's now secondary for the U.S. since it's withdrawing, whether or not Afghan parties can work out an arrangement. Last Sunday, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The readouts from both sides are interesting. The Foreign Minister reaffirmed Pakistan's desire for a broad-based and comprehensive partnership with the United States that was anchored in close economic cooperation, enhanced regional connectivity, and common vision for a peaceful South Asia. This is the first paragraph of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs press release, which is a readout of sorts of this telephone conversation. The State Department readout says Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken spoke today with Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and highlighted the importance of continued cooperation on the Afghan peace process, Pakistan's progress on countering terrorism, and the potential to expand our trade and commercial ties and to improve regional connectivity in South Asia. But let's get to our panel now. I'm joined by Ambassador Shaikh, former Foreign Secretary, and Joe Fleming, who comments on U.S. foreign policy in Asia and South Asia. Let me begin with Ambassador Shaikh here. Ambassador Shaikh, what do the readouts tell us? I mean, let's share them off the usual sort of diplomatics and get to the substance of it.
Well, let me put it to you this way: that the Israeli crisis broke, since this particular raid has been launched by Israel. This was the first call to the first Muslim country to be called by Antony Blinken, and he made sure that his conversation with us suggested that anything that is happening in Palestine is not of concern to Pakistan, because as the first Muslim country he called, he talked only about Afghanistan, about increased collaboration and about connectivity, but did not mention Israel at all. Immediately after that, he called a whole series of Arab foreign ministers, in which the principal focus was on the crisis, the tragedy that was developing in Palestine. I thought that we should read this correctly as meaning that so far as the Americans are concerned, this is not a problem with the Muslims. This is a problem of the Arabs and Israel, and has to be dealt with in that particular fashion. Now, people may not agree with this particular interpretation, but this is how I see the sequence in which the calls were made. You were the first Muslim country to be called. This was the message that we'll talk to you about Afghanistan, we'll talk to you about increased collaboration, trade and connectivity, etc., subjects that we have been discussing all along, and then went on to make other calls. The readout, the American readout, was, as you may have noted, about 3 lines, and focused itself exactly on the subjects I've just mentioned. Was this meant to be more? Well, obviously, our readout is much more extensive and talks about Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab having told him about our concerns with regard to what is happening in Palestine, and that we wanted some action to be taken in that regard. But I think that we, in diplomatic terms, he was telling us that so far as America is concerned, Pakistan is not involved in so far as the Palestine-Israel problem is concerned. Second,
I'm happy noted that, but as you said, just to apprise our viewers, this is the second last paragraph of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs press release. On our side, it says the Foreign Minister apprised Secretary Blinken of Pakistani people's deep concern and anguish on the worsening humanitarian situation in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories, and underscored the importance of U.S. role in ensuring necessary steps to help address the dire situation, restore peace, and facilitate a just solution. So to the extent that, Ambassador Shaikh, to the extent that you're saying that Secretary Blinken wanted to sort of signal to us that, he's not here to talk about Israel and Palestine, that didn't seem to work.
Oh, well, it worked in terms of the signal that they were sending you, that this is what we intend doing. Now, we know that we intend proceeding separately. Right now, Shah Mahmood Qureshi Saab is on his way, or may have reached now, New York, along with the Turkish and the Malay representatives to plead the Palestinian cause. But this is the signal that the United States was seeking to send us. Okay,
let's get to Joe Fleming. Mr. Fleming, what do you think of the calls, A? Secondly, leaving aside for the moment what's happening in Israel and Palestine, as I said in my opening, the central plank has been Afghanistan's more of a transactional relationship. And it seems that, in all probability, it's going to take the same direction even as U.S. withdraws. What are the areas where you think both sides could, if at all, interest each other?
Yeah, sure. I think the ambassador makes some great points touching on the Palestine issue. But I think to your point, the U.S. Pakistan relationship has, for the longest time, been focused primarily on security. Certainly since the U.S. entered Afghanistan, that's been the number one focus. I think looking at the call and looking at the readouts, you see that I think Afghanistan is the number one priority for the U.S. I think as that moves forward, it's going to be a challenge for Pakistan to change that narrative and expand the scope of the relationship to other things. Certainly, in speaking about counterterrorism on the call, I think FATF is an issue that the U.S. is very interested in. That's probably a part of the counterterrorism discussion. From my understanding, I think Pakistan is quite close to being removed from the FATF list, hopefully this June. They've made fairly incredible progress given a very, very complicated set of circumstances. But as far as Afghanistan goes, the Biden administration has shown that it's a high priority for them to get out of the country and to do so in a managed fashion. And I think there's only one way to do that, and that's working with Pakistan. In terms of Pakistan, increasing that relationship, I think it, beyond this call, it speaks to the relationship that, there have been two calls, I believe, with Secretary Blinken and the foreign minister. And there have also been two calls between Secretary Blinken and General Bajwa. Again, I think that speaks to the security focus of the relationship. Now, that said, to the ambassador's point, while I think Pakistan wants to play a role in some of these bigger issues around Palestine, and I think they can play a role in those issues, it's going to be a challenge, and it's been a challenge for a long time expanding that scope. But as the U.S. gets out of Afghanistan over the next several years, certainly there's going to be a long-term focus still on security in the region. But I think it provides Pakistan an opportunity to expand their relationship with the U.S. In ways they haven't been able to do over the past 2 decades, whether it's on trade and economy, which I think is certainly an area the U.S. is interested in when it comes to, counterbalancing China. They've had a number of calls with the Indians focused specifically on that issue. And I think, more than any country in the region, Pakistan plays a central role in that conversation.
Okay. Some very interesting points, Ambassador Shaikh. Mr. Fleming has talked about, I'm going to come to the economic commercial side of it in a minute, but Fleming talked about Pakistan sort of increasing the scope of its diplomatic involvement in relation to Palestine and Israel. Now, one argument is that this is actually something that basically strengthens our own, standard position on Indian-occupied and illegally annexed Kashmir. So, in terms of the principle of it, in terms of the norm of it, and also in terms of the UN Security Council resolution, which is the sort of, international legal framework in and through which Pakistan has been arguing its point and its position vis-a-vis Kashmir and also Palestine and Israel. So to me, it seems that more than simply trying to sort of expand the scope of its diplomatic activity, it's more like sort of entrenching its state practice, in relation to the principle that applies to occupied territories.
Yes, well, I think that what I was particularly struck by was that when the UN Security Council met, the resolution that the United States ought to project or to ask for received just the vote from the United States. No other country voted for that particular manner of looking at the Palestine issue. This was, I think, perhaps the first time that the United States has found itself in this position in the United Nations Security Council particularly. But it's something that they seem to be prepared to live with. And therefore, in terms of the parallel that you've drawn, and the parallel is relatively is accurate, I don't think that currently either the supporters of the Palestinians or the countries that voted against the United States are seeing the parallel quite as you are. I'm sorry, it's a difficult situation, but it is something that we must recognize, that while the parallel is almost exact, this is not how the world is looking at it. The world looks at Palestine and Israel as an immediate problem, something to be that has to be addressed, but not thinking that if we are addressing this, then we should also address the other issue where there is the denial of the right to self-determination, and that has been with the United Nations since 1948.
Just as a clarification, I wasn't talking about the realpolitik of it. Obviously, much as we would want, the Indian occupied and now illegally annexed Kashmir still doesn't have the kind of traction with the world that the Palestinian issue is. But I was just referring to the legal and normative side of it. But let me go back to Joe Fleming here. So Joe Fleming, you talked about the trade and investment potential, and you also said that you refer to the Chinese investment in Pakistan. You also talked about the U.S. officials speaking to their counterparts in India, with whom they have a strategic partnership, if I might add. But it seems that despite some assessment, for instance, the senior study group at the USIP had put out a report with reference to the U.S.-Chinese relations, and in that had referred to Pakistan and China's role in Pakistan and what the U.S. could do actually to sort of counterbalance. And, among various other proposals was obviously about the U.S.-Pakistan trade increases and investments. But it doesn't seem to me that at this point the U.S. side is really invested in that. It might get to that point post-withdrawal, but right now it doesn't seem to me that there is much appetite for that, or even major interest in doing that.
Yeah, I think you're certainly right to a degree. I think over the past several years, certainly the part of the challenge with foreign investment has been the FATF situation. It makes foreign investment very complicated. I've seen some numbers indicating, I think, from the Pakistani government that, FATF results in about $10 billion a year lost to the Pakistani economy. I think that's a process that's moving in the right direction. I think whether it's June or this fall, Pakistan will probably see themselves removed from that list, and the U.S. certainly wants them to be removed. On the other hand, I think we're still seeing the Biden administration formulating policy in a lot of areas. A number of the mid to senior level officials within the State Department and other agencies are still being appointed and reviewed by the U.S. Congress for appointment. It takes time. During the Trump administration, the relationship with India was very personality driven between Trump and Modi. The Indians, they knew how to play Trump quite well, or at least play to his ego. I think during the Biden administration, it's going to be a challenge as well for Pakistan to overcome that relationship in some ways. But as Afghanistan is drawing down, I think the relationship with China is one of the few areas that is of critical importance to the U.S. And I think it's a two-way street. I know during the Trump administration, there was outreach to Pakistan through some U.S. agencies, including the Development Finance Corporation, which is similar to the U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund in some ways. It loans money to foreign countries for projects like roads, bridges, infrastructure, power lines, things like that. I think there is interest and there's opportunity in Pakistan. I know here, just from our business, certainly there are always U.S. companies that are interested in learning more about the market. It is quite interesting. But I think on the other hand, Pakistan has to make a decision as well. Certainly they've seen how the Chinese operate, like many other countries in the world, and there are always strings attached. The Chinese have invested substantially in Pakistan, but I know some of that investment is at question currently, including a large new tranche of funding, about $6 billion for a major railroad project. I think the U.S. has a number of priorities in the world, and in some cases it's up to Pakistan and their diplomatic corps to bring up these issues and show the U.S. that there is an interest in discussing a balancing. I think from the U.S. standpoint, I'm sure it'll come up, but there's certainly a view that India is the point of the spear, so to speak, when it comes to countering Chinese influence in the region, and I think Pakistan could play a much larger role in that. But I think they're going to have to push for it.
Right. Stay with me, Joe Fleming. Let me pull in Ambassador Shaikh. Ambassador Shaikh, talking about trade, investment. There's been, as you know, a lot of stress from our side on geoeconomics. Now, that obviously necessitates a new orientation, or shall I say reorientation of diplomacy in a way where our missions and our ambassadors and rest of the staff need to focus on that, and also perhaps need to be trained or retrained, or we need to reconfigure the missions in ways that where we have people there who can approach the foreign governments and the private sector and whoever is interested in trying to attract investment. Now, is that something that would need a major overhaul, or do you think that we already have structures which can be sort of tweaked here and there, and we get this bus moving?
Well, Ajaz, if you don't mind, I'll start with trying to describe what our bilateral economic relationship with the United States is right now. Our largest trading partner or our largest export market is the United States of America. We send about $4 billion worth of goods to the United States. And I see no reason why the United States will not allow the expansion of this if we develop the capacity to be able to do so. Second, the United States holds considerable influence in the World Bank, in the IMF, in the Asian Development Bank, and frankly, even in the Chinese Infrastructure Bank, which tries to emulate now the practices of the older multilateral institutions. So in all these, I think that the United States would be quite happy to see an enlargement of Pakistan's exports or Pakistan's economic collaboration, so long as Pakistan can create the condition for those that collaboration to take place. Our growth rate right now, perhaps partly pandemic related, partly related to what we just talked about in terms of the benign neglect that economic diplomacy has suffered in the past from Pakistan. Both these need to be corrected, but essentially what needs to be corrected is developing capacity in Pakistan. We have a great potential. I've always talked about the fact that we have great potential, but that potential is not being utilized. Now, I see some things happening which suggest that we are moving in that direction, that we are trying to incentivize our businessmen to enlarge their capacity, etc. Second, to turn to connectivity. I think when we talk about connectivity, we are talking about something that we did quite successfully now under the TIR. Our trucks carried goods from Pakistan to Uzbekistan, through Afghanistan, and it went through without incident. I think I saw a time frame which said 48 hours is what it took for our truck from Karachi to reach Tashkent. So this is a good move. It is a move that has started and that can continue. It seems that despite all the problems that exist in Afghanistan, so far it has not impeded the flow of this sort of traffic. So I think that is something that we should focus on, because Tashkent then represents, admittedly, Uzbekistan is probably the largest market in Central Asia. But once you open this route, then you talk about getting Tapi, getting Kasa into Pakistan using the same route. Right now, that route seems very dangerous, but if Turkmenistan is prepared to put some more money into the creation of the infrastructure for Tapi, for the Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, that may work. The Kasa may work, but it depends on the degree to which what I suspect is likely to happen in Afghanistan, and that is its descent into chaos.
Absolutely, I was going to say that all of this, unfortunately, a throwback to the 90s. But thank you so much. That was Ambassador Najmuddin Shaikh speaking with us. Joe Fleming, since you lobbied for Pakistan at one time, I just wanted to draw on your expertise and experience to inform our viewers of what the problems are. Is it just the Indian caucus? Is it lack of capacity on the Pakistani side? Is it more about geopolitics? What are the factors that go into this?
Yeah, first I want to touch on something that you mentioned to the ambassador speaking on the diplomatic corps. Having lobbied for Pakistan, I worked closely with the embassy in Washington, and I can say at least in Washington, the Pakistani diplomatic officials are incredibly sophisticated, incredibly competent. They're good at doing their job, but like any country, the diplomats on the ground are driven by policy decisions in the home country. It's not up to the ambassador, it's not up to the embassy to set economic policy, to set focus. It's up to Islamabad. So that really lies with the foreign minister. And I think, there has been an effort certainly to focus on other issues, and there's been an effort for decades to widen the scope of the relationship. I think, from my view, under the Trump administration, it was difficult, given the India relationship, given the personal relationship between President Trump and President Modi. But I think there are opportunities. And again, I think really it comes down to Islamabad coming up with a focused plan to focus on, the economic scope. In some cases, the U.S. isn't going to want to have that discussion. They're going to want to talk about Afghanistan. They're going to want to talk about counterterrorism, and that's okay. The U.S. can be single-minded in many ways, the diplomats here. But on the other hand, there are facets within the U.S., whether it's members of Congress or the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, which the embassy does engage with, but I think there are areas that could be focused on. I think during the Biden administration, Pakistan has an interesting opportunity as it relates to climate change. I know everyone was very scandalized by the fact that Pakistan wasn't invited to Biden's climate summit, at least initially, and they were invited later. I think that really speaks more to a lack of focus and a lack of understanding within a new administration in the U.S. than any effort on behalf of Pakistan. But that said, I mentioned Development Finance Corporation for the U.S., and there's other agencies as well. But the Biden administration has certainly pushed the concept that U.S. foreign aid, U.S. foreign funding, U.S. support of U.S. businesses in the green sector is going to be a priority under this administration. And I know Prime Minister Khan has also expressed that climate change issues, including kind of a green economy, are a focus for Pakistan. Speaking to the ambassador's point of Pakistan or the U.S. welcoming Pakistan's increased trading scope, I 100% agree with him. I think that part of that focus is expanding the Pakistani industrial base, and part of that is electricity. Pakistan's done a good job over the past decades, expanding availability and distribution, but there's still a long way to go, specifically on the distribution side. I know there's a number of power plants coming online.
Those are definitely the areas where Pakistan and U.S. cooperation would be beneficial, certainly for Pakistan, also for the United States. So thank you so much. That was Joe Fleming giving us his view on Pakistan-U.S. relations. Joining me now is Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi, the former diplomat and currently executive director of CISS, an Islamabad-based think tank. Ambassador Naqvi, thank you for being on the program. So quickly, since we are headed towards wrapping up the segment, give me your view of the areas of cooperation that would likely define U.S.-Pakistan relations in terms that are more than just transactional.
Well, you see, the areas of cooperation have been defined by the Imran Khan government in a number of encounters and occasions. Now, there is a focus on geoeconomics. There is a position that we don't want aid, we want to have more trade. We want cooperation in areas like climate change and combating international menace like terrorism, like drug trafficking. We also need help and cooperation in renewable energy, nuclear energy. So this is a new kind of format of bilateral cooperation that this government has adopted. I think the scope for Pakistan-US relations is considerable. However, there are its limits. And the limit for me, one important limit, is that it need not be a very cozy or close partnership. It's more of a bilateral cooperation between friends who have many common points to deal with. You see, when I was in Washington, Ijaz, we did a study as to where does Pakistan stand in the U.S. The U.S. Gradation of countries, and unless we have a major matter to deal with, like what happened after 9/11 or earlier the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, Pakistan is somewhere between 30th to 40th in the U.S. Reckoning of countries abroad. When a big issue comes up like the Soviet intervention or the war on terror, then we go up to 15 or 15th to 20th, in that range. So we should know where we stand. And our problem has been that we have seen Pakistan-US relations only in the perspective of a bilateral relationship. The bilateral relationship is informed by the broader perspective that the Americans have. And on our part, we have to worry about our national interest. We have to see how things look to
Absolutely.
us.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point. That's a very important point. And on that note, thank you so much. That was Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the ongoing violence in Myanmar, which is reeling under military rule. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Violence continues in Myanmar. Myanmar's military has entered a small town in western Chin state, which took up arms against them 3 weeks ago. Activists from the volunteer Chinland Defense Force say they have retreated from Mindat to spare the town further bombardment. Mindat is one of several towns where opponents of the military have armed themselves. Nearly 800 people have died in mainly unarmed protests at February's coup, which ousted the elected government. Local residents in Mindat set up what they called the People's Administration Team, stating that they did not recognize the authority of the military government. Earlier this week, the military declared martial law in the town. It has described those defying its authority there as terrorists and says it will set up a military tribunal to put on trial those responsible for attacks on the security forces. To discuss the situation further, I'm joined by Lwin, Rohingya activist and co-founder of Free Rohingya Coalition and Boycott Myanmar. Lwin, give me your sense of the situation in the Chin state and also the fact that now it's quite clear that the rebel groups have decided that they're going to fight back. So what are the chances of, their capturing territory or for the Myanmar military to have setbacks against them?
First of all, let me clear that the group fighting back with the Myanmar security forces, I mean the military and the police in Chin state are not the insurgency group. They just formed this defense group because they are defenseless, they are unprotected. That is the reason, they have formed this defense group just to exercise self-defense. So the story is on April 24, 7 peaceful protesters were being detained by the Myanmar security forces. And as the people in Mindat, they demanded they demanded to release them. The security forces promised them that they will be released soon. But they waited until the May 12 and they didn't release. That is the reason, the people defense, the Chinland Defense Force in Mindad decided to fight back with Myanmar security forces. So from May 12 to 15, 6 members of the Chinland Defense Force were killed by the security forces. And up to now, total 9 members were killed by the security forces. Today, I have got the update from the local media and the local people. So on May 15, the Chinland Defense Forces decided to stop fighting with the security forces because they abducted the 15 youth and using them as human shield just to save this, the abductee from the security forces' hand. They stopped fighting, but the security forces didn't stop. They have been firing with a heavy weapon. Last night also, her parents were just looking for the car to go to the Magwe region to get the medical treatment. Finally, today morning, they got a car and, they had to hold the white flag. So can you imagine how the situation have been worsened there, So not only in the Mindad, but also the nearby town like Hakka and also the Kamplat and another town is Tidane. Also, in everywhere the military sent the reinforcement by the helicopter at least I think at least 12 times as a reinforcement, so that people are living in fear. At least 5,000 people from Minda and thousands of people from Kampala fled from their houses, and they are in the forest. Since the mosquitoes are in presence.
Yes, the report suggested that they were rounding up men, and so men were taking shelter in the forest. But I'm also joined by Simon Billenness, who's human rights advocate, executive director, International Campaign for Rohingya, director, No Business with Genocide. Simon Billenness, we have, spoken on this program about the situation in Myanmar, and every time we talk about it, unfortunately, violence seems to have, gone a couple of notches, up from last time. So now Myanmar being an extremely ethnically diverse country with almost like 135 different ethnic groups, how far and how long do you think this can go on? I mean, in the sense that while the Myanmar military is extremely rigid and hierarchical, the fact is that there have been reports of some desertions recently. Deutsche Welle, in fact, did a report on, saying that they talked to 3 deserters, 3 of them and their officers, and, they've sort of given them an insight into how the Myanmar military actually works. So give us a sense of, currently the situation and whether there is any silver lining here.
Well, I think one silver lining here is that yesterday, the United States, Canada, and the UK put sanctions on the military junta's State Administration Council, its ruling council, and on numerous military junta ministers in this junta, and that is a big step in furthering the complete delegitimacy of this military regime. And I think it sets the stage for the US, the UK, Canada, and the European Union to start to increasingly recognize the civilianly led national unity government, and to also put further restrictions on the Myanmar military and its ability to bankroll itself from foreign investments and foreign companies, most notably the oil industry. So I think that's the silver lining that we have, is that the international community, and more importantly, the international community led by the United States, is putting increased sanctions on the military because of these atrocities, like we're seeing now in Chinland.
Yeah, so would these also include freezing of assets? Because apparently some of the generals are very rich. They have foreign investments. So would these sanctions also strike at those assets?
These are sanctions that are both visa sanctions and financial sanctions, and it doesn't only affect members of the military junta. It also affects a number of their family members who are also active in business. And if there's one thing that we would learn from sanctions in the past, is that the Myanmar military really feels it.
Okay. Ness and Lwin, Simon Billenness has finally given me some good news, in the last couple of months. Every time we've done a program on Myanmar, it's more bad news. So at least the silver lining is that something is being done to sort of, put the pressure on the junta. But do you think that this would be enough, or do you think that the junta has other, avenues in and through which they can keep sort of enriching themselves?
Well, since the second week of the FIFA, there were a number of sanctions imposed by the U.S., Canada, UK, and the European Union. But, if you look at the foreign investment in Myanmar, the largest investor are, the Singapore, Thailand, China, and the Korea. They need to act. Acting alone by the Western government is not enough. And the most important is the military, the State Administrative Council, the Temodor, have been terrorizing the people in Myanmar, all the ethnic minority, including the Rohingya, for almost 6 decades now. So the committee representing the People Parliament have declared them as a terrorist group. This should be followed by the all Western government. That is the most important. What we want is solution, not the long, the step by step. They don't really care. As the military, even if the country become like a North Korea, they will really not care. Sanctions are nothing for them. So what? If I have to tell you frankly, I am the activist, not the politician or not the businessman. So if I have to tell you that frankly, they can bomb the the Libya or the Iraq, wherever they want. They have to do the same thing in Nepal. Then it will stop. There is no way. That is the reason that National Unity Government has found the People Defense Force, and they are now trying to mobilize all the weapons they need, because they realize that the armed revolution is only the solution, because the international community so far, they are talking, they are taking the action, but these are the limited. This is not going to end the crisis in Myanmar.
Okay, those are very strong words, but I also understand the feelings and the reality behind those words. Thank you so much to Simon Billenness. Thank you to Ness and Lwin. This is all from In Focus this evening. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. And yes, about the COVID-19 threat, please stay safe and follow the non-vaccine safety protocols. Good night and goodbye.